Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dean Aguilar. I'm Associate Dean at the University of Utah's Quinney College of Law. Trying a new setup today. I have a green screen, and for some reason, I guess it thinks some of my hair is green, so it's doing weird things with it. So you can make comments in chat if you like. Today's session is on financing law school and investment in your future. I'm going to switch to a shared screen here in a moment, but I do want to just kind of lay out some of the housekeeping matters in regard to questions. I would appreciate it if people ask questions either in the chat or raise their hand in the process, but just know I've got a fair amount of material to cover. I'm going to be covering financing your legal education from the application side of things, the 3 years that you'll be attending law school, then your year of licensing. And so I've got a bunch of information and a number of slides I'd like to get through. So I'm going to ask that we hold off questions until the end, but if you don't want to lose your thought as you're listening to my presentation, please don't hesitate to type in your question into the chat. I will get to those when I'm done with the slides and the presentation. I was hoping to see if there was going to be an opportunity to upvote questions if you had them. And it looks like I'm not going to have that option, so we're going to have to stick with the chat. I would ask, it makes things easier from a presentation standpoint if when we get to the question and answer that you turn on your videos. It's always nice to see your lovely faces, but it also lets me know if somebody's raising their hand and has just a quick question, they don't have to type it into the chat. So with that, I'm going to switch to the shared screen and begin my presentation. There we go. Julia, I can see you, and I'm going to ask if you, because I can see your reaction, if you can see my slides. If you can see can you see my cursor moving around?
I can, yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thanks for doing that. For some reason, it went to the end of it. Like I said, I got a lot of material to cover for you guys. Okay. All right. The information on this slide, and I am going to make my slides available to Emily and Corey, so the slide deck will be able to be accessed through Whova as after the event. The contact information you see at the bottom of the slide is all my direct contact. So that's my personal email address at the law school, my cell number. I'm working remotely from home, so that's the best way to get a hold of me. And if you'd like to set either a Zoom or a telephone conversation up with me, that Calendly link is the best way to go there in terms of making sure we have enough time. You'll have the choice of setting up a 15-minute, half-hour, or 1-hour meeting on that. So, as the title indicated, I think law school is a lifetime investment. And in seeing or considering how you're going to pay for it, I think that's the best mindset to go into this with. There's 3 quotes or statements here that I like to begin with. And that is, first, past performance is no guarantee of future results. That's true in investing as well as in life, as well as in the application process. I think as you guys go through your law school experience, get your jobs after graduation, and begin saving for retirement, this is one of the first items that you will see from the person who's going to advise you on stocks if you're going to be using stock portfolio as part of your retirement plan. And that is, well, there's going to be a lot of data available to you. There's no assurances that things are going to continue if they're going quite well in that regard, or if they're not going so well that they're not going to get better. It's just, nothing is guaranteed in the future. With that acknowledgement, I also want to look at the quote from Warren Buffett there. Back in the early 2000s, when asked about kind of crazy behavior people were engaging in the stock market, and whether, how that was affecting his willingness to invest in the market, he stated it was It was his advice to be fearful when others are greedy, actually was his word, and greedy when others are fearful. I like the word bold better. It's more positive, especially as it relates to the admissions process in law school. You want to have a positive outlook. But what he was saying there is it worried him when everybody was being greedy and bold and engaging with the stock market, but not being very thoughtful about decisions that they were making in the process and not doing much research. And that made him fearful, because it made his ability to gauge how the behavior of the market would occur. And so that led to his having some fearfulness. But when others became fearful and pulled away from the stock market, he saw that as an opportunity for him to be greedy or bold, from the standpoint of that's when opportunities present themselves. You are all in that situation right now, both in regard to what happened in 2011 with the Great Recession and what's happening now with COVID. I will say to a certain degree with regard to the current economic conditions. Back in 2010, just before the Great Recession really had its full impact on the society, that was the year in which law schools nationally experienced one of the largest applicant pools we saw. We saw nearly 100,000 people applying to law school to try and fill 52,000 seats. And since that time, especially right after 2011, there was a precipitous drop in the volume of applications. People were fearful of going to law school. They were fearful of the costs associated with that. And what that created was some opportunities for people who stayed in the law school admissions process and sought to take advantage of those opportunities when they saw that volume of applications dropping to, between 50 and 60,000 applicants. Now, since that time, law schools have shrunk their law schools class sizes, so it is a good deal more competitive in the process right now, but we still haven't rebounded to that 100,000 or so applications. Actually, it was closer to about 92,000 applicants. And so I think still it is the case that there are going to be good opportunities available for you in the application process that would not have been available if we were talking 8 years ago or in the past about those opportunities. So I think this is something to think about in terms of taking advantage of opportunities. But as it relates to both these statements, do not act without thinking well and engaging in very serious thought. That was a follow-up statement he made in that interview, that even in regard to opportunities presenting themselves, you want to make informed choices, which is very true about both paying for law school and applying to law school. And in this legal education as an investment approach, I think there's a number of things you want to do, and I want you to take out of this workshop. One is you're going to have to engage in some research to know what you're getting yourself into. Develop a financial strategy for how you're going to approach paying for those three elements associated with your legal education. Start acquiring resources that you're going to need to make this happen, and then start allocating those resources in the way that's going to be most positively impactful for you. Related to that, I wish I could see you all on one screen. For those of you who are in the application process right now, I would strongly encourage you to develop and determine your risk aversion number, whereas I have in parentheses there your debt aversion number. And what I'm referring to there is I'm going to show you some information on the average debt people are graduating from law school with. And I want you to think before Thanksgiving comes around. I want you to think about this and come up with your own debt aversion number. And it's important for you to do that if you're currently in the application cycle, because it's going to be an exciting time for you. And as you get through your submitting your applications and the offers of admission start rolling in and scholarships opportunities start rolling in, and you start investigating schools and you get excited about it, you want to know that you have made a decision about a debt number that you are very uncomfortable with. And along with this excitement that's going to occur in the next 3 to 4 months is a deadline in April or early May for some schools, in which you're going to be required by schools to submit a seat deposit and commit to enrolling in their programs. What this workshop's going to do is hopefully show you how you can determine what that likely level of debt is going to be for you as you're comparing schools. And if your first choice school happens to be one where it actually is likely you'll either exceed or be at your debt aversion number, You need to know that if you're going to be making a decision to attend that school. And in coming up with this number, I'm not saying that you shouldn't make a decision that leads to a likelihood of you crossing that number, but you need to make a conscious decision and be informed about whether or not you're going to do that. For those of you who are 2 or 3 years away from the application process, I actually encourage you to have that number ready by the time Halloween comes around. Because for some schools, the early decision process is going to be happening, and decisions actually start rolling out in November for some schools. And so just be aware of it. And my recommendation in coming up with that debt aversion number is for Halloween. And then finally, that's what is part of this workshop, I hope, is going to be you engaging in due diligence. And due diligence is a term of art in law that for those of you who are going to go into mergers and acquisitions, it's the part of the process where you become fully informed of what you're getting yourself into financially if you're going to be acquiring another business. That's what one big business does when it's about to buy another business. And when all the signatures are about to be put to the contract, the lawyers and the accountants go into the business that's being purchased and looks through their books and looks and sees if they're involved in any litigation, looks at all their assets and their debits and their credits, and it informs the company that's doing the purchasing what they're about to get themselves into, and so that they know what they're acquiring, both good and bad. And that's part of what you're engaged in through the application process, the due diligence. Okay, what's that first step, that research? So I'm going to do a little research for you and help you out here. It starts with tuition. This is part of your the cost of investing. What are you going to be paying in tuition for the 3 years that you're going to be a full-time law student? Here's 3 years of data. People attending public schools who are residents are paying a little over $28,000 or paid. This is last year's figures. We don't have this year's figures quite yet. For those who are attending as non-residents, the average tuition nationally is a little over $42,000. And for those attending private schools, the average tuition is $49,000 a year. So you multiply those numbers by 3 to get your 3 years of tuition costs and add some percentage rates. Unfortunately, I think with where we are in COVID, you're going to see some greater increases in tuition in the next 3 to 4 years, especially if the economy doesn't bounce back quickly. Then there's scholarships. This is a way of discounting some of those tuition counts, and the ABA does collect this data. Do know that the national median scholarship amounts per recipient I want to let you know that they reflect a few things as conditions of what this information really is saying. It only reflects the median amount of tuition for people who got scholarships. Not everybody in school gets scholarships, so this isn't per capita in terms of school attendance. It also does not reflect any specific kind of scholarships. So the figures you see there, you don't know how much of it is reflecting renewable scholarships or merit scholarships or need-based scholarships. What the ABA has us report is simply if we gave a scholarship to somebody, how much it was, and of all the scholarship money we gave, what were the median, the 75th, and the 25th percentile amounts. Okay. And this also reflects just for full-time students. It's a couple of years old in terms of the data because the ABA wants us to report the data that is complete. And so for the 1920 school year, we're just completing our submission of that information. So, but what you can see here is in the 2018-19 school year, the median scholarship for people attending public school is $15,000, and 74% of students attending got some kind of scholarship. And for private schools, that amount was higher. It was a little over $23,000, $23,600, and 76% of private school students were on some kind of scholarship in that academic year. Then there's the debt trend. I always like to put this slide third so that you have a moment to think about what that debt aversion number may mean to you. This gives you some benchmarks to consider as you think about what you're comfortable with. In spite of what many of you read on Reddit and what have you, not everybody is on a scholarship, and by no means is everybody on a full ride scholarship, as you can see by these debt numbers. The good news is the percentages have been going down. So in 2017, 77% of public school graduates had to borrow some kind of loan during their time there, and the average was $88,000. It's 74 for the class of 2019, so it dropped 3 percentage points, and that debt dropped a little bit. For private school graduates, that number has been increasing slightly, but in terms of the amount of debt, but the percentage has dropped slightly in terms of 75% of graduates have debt. That six-figure number of $27,400 is a small mortgage. And I think it's not bad to think about the investment of law school if you're going to take on debt as a mortgage. And that might be a measure of kind of what you're comfortable with there. Now, the dividend of your investment in law school. So you've been paying into the investment through tuition and acquiring debt at graduation. Here's some figures that show that the percentage of employment has steadily been rising as the economy has been improving. We'll see what happens with the class of 2020 when that data is produced toward the end of August this summer, because the data they collect reflects hiring that occurs through January after graduating in May or June of the third year. Overall employment has exceeded 90% for the class of 2019. I believe for the class of 2020, it's also going to be somewhere in the 90% range. The percent of people who were employed who had jobs that required bar passage has steadily been increasing. It's almost gone up 10% since we were in that recovery from the Great Recession. And it's an important number because this is the number that is going to let you know for people who went to law school to practice law, this is what their employment rate. This is the employment rate for everybody who graduated, regardless of whether they're working in a job that is representing clients or requires them to be licensed, or working as a barista at Starbucks, or working as a policy advisor in a legislative counsel's office where a license to be practicing law isn't required for that kind of work. This is the overall employment number. These numbers reflect the salaries in these various categories. I think sometimes it's surprising for some people if they haven't been fully informed about kind of the wide range of salaries that exist in the legal profession. They range from a low of people working in the public interest of about a little less than $55,000 a year to a high of $125,000 a year for people going into private practice. 55% of the class of 2019 went into private practice, so that's good news in terms of the percentage of law school graduates that are earning that kind of money. But in terms of looking at the distribution of where employments are, that 45% or so are in jobs that are paying less than those six figures. The next largest category is in the business sector. Now, I like to show the trends, especially I think it's helpful with the year that we're going into and the fact that it appears that the reactions to how we're dealing with the pandemic are going to persist for a while, and this may have an impact on employment trends. So going back into 2011, 2010, when the impacts of the Great Recession were really being felt, less than half of the graduating class went into private sector work. And that's picked back up as we've recovered through the economy up to 55%. I highlight this number because this is the area of legal employment that is usually most quickly impacted by downward trends in the economy, the private sector. In business, I like to show that this highlight where it looks like a lot of law school graduates and seeking to be more entrepreneurial and more nimble in their employment choices and the direction in which they pursue employment right after law school, business and took up a lot of the slack there. Note that this category is not exclusively the general counsel's office for business and corporations. It reflects any kind of job that people get in kind of corporate America. And what we found is a lot of JD preferred jobs can be very attractive to folks. And that includes, say, being the director of human resources, being in the regulatory compliance office, being in the contracting office for businesses that engage in a lot of contractual work, especially with the government, those kinds of things. So this is an area where that JD preferred credential can be helpful in that area. I would say that before 2010, this public interest was in the less than 5% range. It looks like public interest took up some of that slack, and it held, actually. People enjoyed that work. Clerkship stayed fairly consistent, as did government and education work. One of the things I want to highlight about the percentages that I just talked about is the fact that those increasing percentages aren't a reflection of an increase in job opportunities. They are an increase in the percentage of the class that got hired and the fact that classes shrunk over the time period as we recovered from the Great Recession. So 44,000 students entered law school, or 44,500 students graduated from law school in 2011. We were up to 47,000 in 2013. This is the class that started law school in 2011, right? And so we had a decline in jobs as we saw through the Great Recession and a large number of graduates. So what started happening is schools started shrinking their class sizes. And so as we shrunk our class sizes, the larger the number of the people in those smaller classes that got jobs is what drove up the percentages for people who had jobs. So understand that. And make note, if it looks like the schools that are offering you admission are also increasing their class sizes as we're going through these economic challenges, because that could reflect perhaps a challenge 3 years from now in getting a job if there's kind of a glut of people who are in the market. So be aware of schools maybe perhaps changing some of their class sizes to benefit some of the revenue generation to help them through this economic crisis that hopefully we'll be in for a relatively short period, but no doubt we'll be experiencing the effects of for at least 2 to 3 years. This is a good slide that shows that percentages. The percentage of graduates with long-term bar passage jobs. So when we were in the depths of the recession, it was down to 57. Now we're up to 74. Going back to what I said earlier, that's more of a reflection of smaller classes in terms of the class of 2019 versus the classes of 2011 through 2013. And these last few slides on the statistics that I'm giving you reflect that even within the private sector, I'm assuming it always impresses me. I got nowhere near $125,000 for my first job coming out of law school. So it's always impressive to me when you see that 6 figures there. But I want to also highlight that within the private sector, there is also a pretty broad range of salaries. So when you're looking at starting salaries in private practice over the last 3 years of reporting, for the very small firms, the salaries are closer to kind of public sector jobs in the government, $60,000. And as it goes up, it goes up. And in fact, where we've seen more salary growth in the last couple of years has been in these medium sized firms, the 26 to 100 person firms, $82,000 to $92,000. And then when we get into the 6 figures, that's where you're having firms of over 100 attorneys and 500 plus. These are where the largest salaries tend to be. So know that there's a range of salaries. And just as importantly, I think, the distribution of people working in those areas. If you look at the attorneys working in firms of between 1 and 100 attorneys, that is about half the people going into private sector work. So realize that as you contemplate the kind of work you would like to engage in and the size of firm you might feel more comfortable in which you would be working and the implications that has for the kinds of salaries that are being earned in those firms. Now, last slide relates to salaries. The law profession has an unusual distribution of salaries. It has what's called either a bimodal graph, because you have bimodal refers to 2 humps in the distribution of the salaries, or what some people call an inverted curve. That is, it's instead of having the peak at the top of, in terms of distribution or frequency of salaries, it's actually a trough at the bottom. And what this reflects is, even though I've been talking about medians and averages as it relates to salaries, the frequency or the number of people who actually earn those particular salaries is fairly low. That the greatest number of people in a salary range tend to be in that number where you've got public sector work like government jobs, judicial clerkships, and business sector work, and then on the private sector on some of the higher paying salaries in some of the bigger firms. And so when you hear averages and medians, know that doesn't reflect kind of the high frequency and traditional peak of a curve when you're talking about averages. That's one of the things I regularly think of when people start giving me data as it relates to averages. Now, all this information I gave to you, I primarily pulled from two sites. The NALP, National Association for Law Placement, it's the organization that Law School Career Services belong to, and it's under the Research and Statistics, Salary and Compensation, Recent Graduates data here. For your chapters, it might be helpful to have an officer in the hierarchy of the leadership be dedicated to collecting and distributing this kind of information to the membership. I always like to recommend to you guys that's something. And then the ABA 509 disclosure page. This is where you can get information for individual schools based on the year that you're most interested. Most people just go to the most recent year, but if you want to see trends, you should pull kind of at least 3 years of data. Or you can go to the compilation for all law schools. So if you select admission data, it'll pull a big spreadsheet for all 200 plus law schools, and it's just the LSAT GPA and number of people enrolled in the school's data. It's a pretty big spreadsheet, but it's an easy way to collect that data and not have to look report by report at each school's website. So I hope you found that information helpful and a great starting place for the research that you should engage in. Now we're getting into the strategy element of my discussion, and that actually relates to what does funding or financing law school really means. It means financing all aspects of your education, the application, enrollment, and licensing phase. I bring up licensing now, even though some of you are 6 years away from this, but the reality is, especially if you want to go into governmental or public interest work, you're going to be needing to support yourself through the licensing phase of your experience. When you graduate from law school, you'll have a diploma. That diploma is your ticket to sit for the bar. If you graduate in May or June, the bar will be administered in July. If you're going to work or want to work in a very large jurisdiction by population, places like New York or California, once you sit for the bar, it will take them until about the first week of November, maybe the last week of October, to grade all those exams. So if you think it takes a long time to get our election results, just wait till you sit for the bar. But those results will come out in November. And then for those very large jurisdictions, it's only after they know who has passed the bar that they will do the character and fitness check on you. And that will take another 2 months. So the swearing in ceremony for those new lawyers doesn't happen until January or until January. And that means if you don't have a job with a firm paying you a salary through those 9 months, you're going to have resources to get you through that aspect of your legal education. Okay. So just kind of stating an obvious, it begins with good budgeting strategy. Have a plan to maintain your budget and maintain a good credit history. And that's important because, as I alluded to just a moment ago, the character and fitness check of your bar evaluation will be a check into your credit history and your financial behavior. You will be signing documents that give access to the bar examiners to go into your financial records and see if you're up to date on your loan payments and what kind of debt you're carrying. They want to make sure that you're not vulnerable to being tempted to using client funds to make payments on things like student loans or credit cards or payroll if you are opening up a small shop where it's just you and a paralegal and a secretary, perhaps. So know that. And so begin making sure you have a strong credit history and financial background that they can look into and not be concerned about your finances. Budgeting tip. When you go to law school, you're going to find that there's some real wealthy people going to law school. Don't try to keep up with the Joneses, as they say, in terms of lifestyle that people may have if they do come from more affluent backgrounds. It can be pretty tempting because you will have lots of access to money, whether it be through credit cards or student loans. And with that money, you can lead a pretty good lifestyle. You can belong to nice gyms. You can take vacations. You can live in a nice apartment or condominium complex. But living that lifestyle is going to be like living the lifestyle of a lawyer. And if you live that lifestyle like a lawyer while you're a student, and you're using student loans to do that, know that you're going to live like a student while you're a lawyer or early in your career, because that 3 years of really good living is going to have to be paid back at some point. So just a word of caution there. Second part of strategy. Have a 3-part plan. I already told you what those parts are going to be: admissions, enrollment, and licensing. Develop budgets for each of those. That's what we're going to talk about next. Then know that you're going to have to spend some time in the application process investigating these options for funding, and there's going to often be applications involved. So make sure you're doing what you can to carve out time in the application year to also have time to fill out applications and seek funding options. Compare all costs. I'll talk about that right now. As you're comparing costs of schools, make sure you're comparing costs of everything. Often what people will do during the expo to compare schools financially is ask the question of, what is your tuition? And that's a good question, but it's an incomplete question. What you should be asking is, what is your total cost of attendance? Because we all have to keep that number in order to participate in the federal financial aid program. And it is a legitimate number that's created because we have to follow federal rules in determining what are the elements of this cost of attendance. So if you were to ask a school that, say, is a private school, but happens to be located in a low-cost rural area, and you only ask, what is your tuition, it's going to sound expensive, because remember that slide that said what the average tuition was for private schools, almost $50,000 a year. And then if you ask a public school that happens to be in a high-cost urban area what their tuition is, it may sound less expensive, because as a public school, especially if you're a resident, the tuition is going to sound lower. But when you ask that question of what is your cost of attendance, then they'll have to tell you the number for not only tuition, but books, supplies, room and board, transportation, and other miscellaneous costs that students incur while attending during the 9-month school year. So make sure you're comparing all costs, not just portions of costs that you'll incur. Consider and have contingency plans, kind of like what we're in right now. For people who had a plan of if anything happened to their housing while they're in law school, they're like, I'm going to be able to move back home or I'll take on a roommate, they may be dealing with this COVID thing a little bit better than if for those students who kind of are locked into a difficult circumstance of housing where they had to share limited bandwidth for their Wi-Fi, and they didn't have funding to kind of expand that or have their roommates. So have contingency plans for if things take a turn south, especially financially. What will you be willing to do? Go to school part-time, move in with your parents, take a leave of absence, those kinds of things. Then finally, ask the hard questions of yourself and the law schools as you go through this process. Part 1 of that 3-part plan, your application expenses. Here's a budget I've worked out for you. Know that as you enter the application process, there's going to be fixed costs, things that you can't change and you have to pay for. That's registering for the LSAT, LSAT score preview, so that if you want to take a look at your score and if you don't like it and you want to not have that score disclosed, that's now an opportunity available to you. Your credential assembly service report and 7 law school reports. The average number of school students apply to is 7, so that's another $500. Requesting your transcripts. You're going to have those sent, and you're probably going to have multiple copies of those sent as you have to update your academic record in the application process. And then the application fees that you will be submitting as part of the application process. So that's how I arrived at that $1,200. Now, what can you do to keep some of your costs down? Well, one is that LSAT registration. There is these costs associated with your CAS report, your LSAT, and law school report score preview, those kinds of things. Do know, if you're not already aware of it, that the Law School Admission Council has an LSAT and CAS fee waiver program that is financial based. You'll have to provide, taxes and other costs and other documentation that verifies what your financial circumstances are. But if you do qualify, you get 2 LSATs for free and 1 writing sample that'll save you $400 or a value of $400. You get a CAS report, CAS subscription plus 6 law school reports, so that has a value of almost $500. You'll get your LSAT score preview. And then there's the Khan Academy free LSAT prep that's already available to you from the Law School Admission Council's website. But that has a value of $900. So that's a pretty big cost saving measure right there. Again, especially against that $1,200 of cost that you're facing. One thing I want to use as an example in the spreadsheet, though, is tied to the variable costs and that resource allocation. LSAT preparation courses. I think, kind of the rack rate for an LSAT prep course, commercial, is in kind of the realm of $1,200. I think is what we know out there. I know that there's many that are less costly, and I know that there's some that can be much more costly, but I think that's kind of ballpark. Now, I want you to think back on the research information I provided to you on some of those earlier slides, and think about that average scholarship amount at a public school. I believe it was $15,000 roughly, right? Okay, so let's think about the LSAT. It's an important part of the application process, and I'm always surprised that when we look at data when they survey people after the LSAT, what a high percentage of people put down that they just did self-preparation for the exam. And it surprises me because everybody knows what an important role the LSAT plays in making decisions on admissions, and how it can impact how competitive you're going to be for scholarships. So it's a pretty important part of the cost, it's an important part of the law school admission process, and it can create opportunities, both financial and which you can put a number on, but also opportunities in which schools you're gaining admission to, which the value of that is something that you have to put on for yourself. How valuable is a school's reputation to you? And that's going to have different values based on your interest, right? But nevertheless, those are important aspects. And if I think people were to consider those, they'd think twice about just doing the self-prep, because while commercial prep there's nothing magic about it in my estimation. There's nothing like, they don't give you the answers. They may give you an approach to looking at the questions, but more than anything, I think they give you a very helpful structure under which to study. And if you think back on the most success you had academically in college or university work, I would suspect for a majority, a lot of that success would be tied to persons who had classes from professors who were very organized and structured, and they taught their class and followed the syllabus. They regularly checked on you as you were progressing through the class, either written work or quizzes. They would review with you. They might offer practice tests. And that's a lot of what goes on with LSAT commercial prep or preparation courses, is providing you with an opportunity to evaluate how you are progressing and information that will help you in that progress. So is there value to that? Is there a likelihood of you improving your LSAT score? I would argue yes. So if in your self-preparation you begin and you're performing at an average level, say 150 to 153 on an LSAT, and by having structure and some instruction on how to improve your performance, it bumps you up to a 157, 158, maybe a 160, which isn't unheard of in terms of, a 6-point improvement if you weren't preparing efficiently in your self-preparation and all of a sudden your preparation is much more effective. I think that can be very helpful. And if you see that kind of score improvement, chances are if you're scoring in that 150, 153 range, you're going to be offered smaller scholarships or no scholarships. And the range of schools to which you're being admitted is going to be very different than if you're performing at that 158 to 160 range in the kinds of scholarships. And so with that LSAT preparation cost, the cost of the investment was $1,200, but you can measure the investment return by a scholarship. If you get an average scholarship at a public school, that'd be $15,000 for the year. So your return on investment of that $1,200 would be $13,500 because you subtract the $1,200 from that $15,000 scholarship. That's the thought process I want you to go through as you think about resource allocation in this investment approach to law school. I'm not going to be as detailed about that as we go through the rest of my presentation, but I like LSAT preparation as an easy example of how to apply that return on investment thought process as you make financial decisions about law school. The next thing I want to highlight on the variable expenses, which is an easy example, I think, is school visits. That's your due diligence. Think about that $127,000 average debt that 75% of private school graduates had in 2019. As I mentioned, that's a small mortgage. Now let's just change this to a different analogy and say, as a mortgage, if you were going to be borrowing $127,000 to buy a studio condominium wherever you live, I know this, most places you can't find something for $127,000, but stick with me on this. Would you just use Craigslist or whatever online medium is available to you in your community for looking for housing to make those decisions and say, oh, look, I'm on the website. I see this is a condo unit that has nice pictures and I'll purchase it? No. You're going to have a real estate agent. You're going to go visit the site. You're going to walk through the building. You're going to look at the neighborhood it's located in. If you have children, you're going to see what kind of schools are there. You're going to look at the upkeep and resources. You're going to look at what the HOA cost is on an annual basis. You're going to do your due diligence before you take on a mortgage to buy that condominium for the mortgage time period of 20 years or so, right? Well, treat your investment in law school the same way. And your school visits are that walkthrough of the houses that you kind of whittled it down to and said, these are the ones I really want to look at. Use the resources that are available to you online and on paper to kind of sift through the information that's important to you. But when it comes down to your top 3 or 4 or 5, make that visit, because it can make a world of change for you as in kind of knowing firsthand what that experience is going to be. But to do that, you're going to have resources available for airfare if you're going to have to fly there, gas if you're driving, lodging if you're going to stay there. A lot of schools will help you sometimes with lodging in terms of pay for hotel costs. Some will give stipends to compensate you for either airfare or the gas you spend on driving there up to certain limits. So I think it's fair to ask. Some schools will let you know right up front if they do that. Others will kind of wait to see if students ask for that assistance. I think it's fair to ask and do so politely. And not all schools have the budget to afford doing that for all students or for students. And just know that some schools just may not be able to give that to you, but it's worth the ask. You're going to have tuition deposits and moving expenses are not covered by financial aid, but that's another $2,500 of costs that you're looking at if you're not doing things to reduce some of the expenses of applying to law school. Okay. So a little bit of background and budget and approaches to meeting the expenses associated with the application process. Now you're in school. Now what? Well, establish your 1 and 3 year budgets. I already talked about the cost of attendance. These are the elements that are associated with the cost of attendance. Tuition, room board, dependent children, that's not automatically included. You're going to have to make the request and provide the social security number for your kids under 13. And it doesn't cover the cost of raising your kids. It only covers the cost of daycare, a version of daycare, what you pay for while you are in class and your children have to be watched. But it increases your cost of attendance, and that's what creates your allowable expenses, which makes you eligible for financial aid. So that's the other important thing about this number. The cost of attendance budget is the amount of money a school can give you either in loans, scholarships, or work study to help you meet the cost of attending their program. It's that financial aid budget that you're eligible for, and that's what goes into computing what that budget is. Know that that budget is for the 9-month school year. If you need to attend summer school, it'll be included for that. Expenses not incorporated into the cost of attendance. Car payments. If you have a new car and you're making high payments on insurance and part payments, that's not a part of that cost of attendance budget. So realize that. Support of a spouse or extended family. As the student, you are expected to receive support through that cost of attendance and financial aid to support yourself in your education, but not a spouse. So the spouse is expected to work or support him or herself. Payment or private other credit card expenses or loan expenses. Periods of non-enrollment. I already alluded to that in regard to summer. And relocations are not a part of that cost of attendance budget. Right? So know that. Knowing what you're going to pay for law school, that cost of attendance budget is something when you talk to schools about it, you multiply that number by 3, you add about 5 to 7% points to that, and you're going to have the figure for which it's going to cost you to go to law school for the next 3 years. It's a really big number. But know that, one, the good news is you have something to put your hands around and say, this is where I need to get my resources. These are the amount of resources I need to acquire to complete this experience. And two, it's going to include things that you're going to incur cost for anyways. Room and board. You're going to have to pay for a place to live, and you're going to have to eat and buy clothing and things like that. So while that's going to be a big number, it's going to include things that you're already going to have to be paying for as you go through there. Resource acquisition. Go for the free money. That's stating the obvious, but make sure as you apply to law school, you know what kind of scholarships or grants they have available. Do they have need-based scholarships? Not all scholarships do. What's the process associated with that? Do they have merit scholarships? What are the conditions and stipulations associated with those? And how do they make those decisions? Do they just make those decisions automatically using your application materials, or do you have supplemental materials that you need to submit, or perhaps interviews you'll have to engage in for some fellowships or larger awards? Those are great questions to ask the representatives at the Law Expo later this afternoon in terms of their scholarship awarding. Know whether those scholarships, or they have scholarships for second and third year students in the event that you don't get a large scholarship, or the scholarship you get offered is only for your first year of law school, and what's the likelihood of you being able to compete well for those scholarships. That's one of those hard questions to ask yourself and of the law school, for example. If you aren't getting full funding for all 3 years of law school, what is available to help you with that in the form of other scholarships you can compete for? But how competitive is it really to earn one of those awards? And where are you going to fit, just kind of speaking frankly, in the pecking order of students to try and get those scholarships? You're going to know kind of where you fit on the numbers based on a school's reported medians and what your numbers are going into the school in terms of your cumulative GPA and your LSAT. So be aware of that. Then diversify your resources. Just like in the stock market investment, you should not just be counting on one thing and one thing only to get you through law school. One of the things that I often see on Reddit is people referring to full ride scholarships. That can refer to so many things to so many different people. I think for a majority of people, that means tuition. But there are some scholarships that are more than tuition. That'll include books and supplies or what have you. So know what's being offered to you, and not just referring to it as colloquially as a full ride. Understand what's being offered to you as it cuts against the cost of tuition or the cost of attendance budget. And if it doesn't cover the total cost of attendance, you'll need to diversify your resource portfolio to meet the expenses associated with transportation, room and board, books and supplies, daycare, things like that. Turn to things like savings. You should be saving now for your first year of law school. If you can save $1,500 for the first year of law school, that's going to help you cover most of your book expenses. And that means you don't have to borrow $1,500 in your first year at 5% interest that will accrue for 3 years before you start making payments on it. All right. And then while you're in law school, start saving money so you have a nest egg for the licensing year in which you'll be paying for things like the bar exam. Work. Well, a lot of schools will not allow you to work during your first year, or will make it very difficult for you to work during your first year. Know that you can, and they do encourage you to work for your second and third year. So work that into your resource allocation for the 3 years of law school. Gifts. For lack of a better phrase, crowdsourcing. Encourage people who traditionally give you gifts throughout your life. Birthday, present, anniversary, religious holidays, your parents, friends, cousins, siblings. Let the people know who have traditionally shared gifts with you as you have gone through life, that if they're going to continue to do so in your time as a law student, that the best way they can help you in law school is, instead of taking you out for dinner or buying you that jacket or whatever they traditionally do, give you a gift card or create a crowdsourcing account and have them contribute to it, and just say it's your law school account, and that you would prefer that they give you whatever they're, equivalent to what they were planning to buy for your birthday as a cash award to help you with your law school expenses. I think that can be a pretty resourceful way to help have those around you help you get through law school. Human resource and VA benefits. Know what's available to you. As a human resource benefit, I always encourage students to always look at the universities that they are attending in two ways. One is for you as a law student, you're also a graduate student. And even if you don't get a job at the law school as a research assistant or a graduate assistant for one of your faculty members, you are eligible to work as a research assistant or graduate assistant in other departments. And sometimes those jobs will include tuition waivers or offices on campus in other departmental buildings, which can be a nice convenience. So know that. The second way to think about it is if you're going to law school with a spouse or a significant other, and you're moving away to do that, encourage them to look at the university where you're going to law school first, because often universities will have human resource benefits packages that'll include benefits for the dependents of their full-time employees. And so, for example, at the school I work at, the University of Utah, once you've been employed for 12 months, your spouse is eligible for a 50% tuition waiver. And that can have some high value at professional school tuition costs. So keep that in mind. Know that loans are going to be a part of this diversity, this resource portfolio, the diversity of this resource portfolio, and know what your needs are. Know what your borrowing needs are and not how much you can borrow and shoot for that as a target. Your cost of attendance budget is not a borrowing target, okay? Every student I know can live below that cost of attendance budget, even a little bit. And so you should not be borrowing the maximum you can. You should always borrow a little less. And if you can borrow even much less, working within a budget, do that, okay? Know your options. The options for borrowing will include tuition and fee, or the loan options. Federal loans, Direct Plus, and unsubsidized loans. Institutional loans, schools will have some of their own loan programs sometimes. I think it's more common at private schools, but if they offer you a loan, compare it to the benefits of the federal loan programs, such as the public service loan forgiveness programming, deferment, and forbearance on payments on those loans. A lot of universities do mimic the federal programs, so look closely at those loans. They may be just as good, if not better. Private loan programs, be very wary of those for paying for the law school experience. A number of these loan programs actually have lower interest rates than the federal interest rates, but know that those interest rates are variable with no cap. And so what that means is if we enter an inflationary cycle, that interest rate is going to climb very quickly. Private loans do also exist for bar exam expenses. You cannot take out federal student loans for bar exam expenses, so you may need to use the private loan programs at some point in your education experience, but I encourage you to use caution as you contemplate those. The subsidized, unsubsidized direct loan program, unsubsidized refers to the fact that interest accrues on these loans while you are a student. The federal direct unsubsidized program, also sometimes called the Stafford Loan Program, you can borrow up to $20,500 a year. Those expenses, that is every year. So, and it's what I call an entitlement loan. Unless you are in default on a student loan or other federal loan impacted by this, you're going to get this money. So you know today that you have $61,500 over the 3 years of law school through this loan program. The interest rate changes slightly every year with a cap of 9.5, depending on what's called the LIBOR rate. But whatever you borrow in a particular year, that interest rate will be the interest rate for the life of the loan. So for our students who are third-year students this year, they borrowed a loan in their first year of law school that had $20,500 at 6.59% interest. For the life of that loan, while they are in repayment, that $20,000 will keep that interest rate. Then when they were second-year students, the next $20,500 they borrowed was at a lower interest rate. LIBOR went down. It was 6.07. That $20,000 is for the life of this loan. And then the interest rates went way down this summer, and it's at 4.3%. And so for the money that they're borrowing their last year of law school, it's this. I don't like the system. I'm just reporting it to you. It makes it really hard to predict what your total loan repayment amount is going to be over the life of the loan, because you don't know what you're borrowing. Your interest rate is for the borrowing you engage in for your third year, because they don't disclose it until July of that school year. Okay. The second kind of loan is called the Graduate Plus loan. This is what I would refer to as a bridge loan. As a bridge loan, this is the loan that if your cost of attendance budget is, say, $60,000, you're not getting a scholarship, and you've only been offered the direct subsidized loan of $20,500, how are you going to pay for the rest of that $60,000 cost of attendance budget, that other $40,000-ish, right? It's with the Graduate Plus loan. You can borrow up to the total cost of attendance minus any other resources you are receiving in the form of scholarships or loans. So that's why I call it the bridge loan. Slightly higher interest rate cap, mimics the process that the direct unsubsidized loan followed, but there is a credit check. And what they're looking for is if you have an adverse credit history. And that means, are you behind 3 months or more on any kind of debt payments? If you are, you're not going to qualify for this. But the good news is they're not looking for a credit score. They're looking for an adverse credit history. So you can remediate this by talking to your lenders or getting within 60 days of delinquency instead of 90, and so that your credit report is rehabilitated. Just know that they do this credit check every year of borrowing. So if you fix it 1 year, if you don't stay consistent on it, then you're going to have that issue every year. If you don't qualify, you can get a credit-worthy co-signer to help you with that if need be. Now, part 3, the year of licensing. Similar costs as when you were applying to law school. The bar exam, moving expenses, living expenses. You're going to go into repayment. The federal student loans that you borrow will have a 6-month grace period before you have to start making payments. So that's good news. Do know that bankruptcy, you're not going to get these loans discharged in bankruptcy at this stage of your career. You're just basically too young. There is a provision in the bankruptcy code to discharge student loan debt, but it's really hard to meet. And I haven't really read of anybody qualifying for it who's less than 60 years old. Considering life insurance, this goes back to your debt aversion number. If you're one of those people who said, I'm cool with $400,000, that's fine. That's your choice. But just know, one of the benefits of the federal student loan program is that if something happened to you, you passed away or became 100% disabled, your debt can be canceled by the federal government. So that's good news. Your $400,000 goes away and your estate isn't responsible for it. The bad news is the IRS sees that as a taxable event. So you're paying 30% tax on that $400,000 debt cancellation. And, 4 times, it's $120,000 of taxes your estate will owe. So some financial advisors recommend getting life insurance to cover what may end up being a pretty high tax bill if you're in that circumstance. So something to consider there. Loan repayment. You're going to have 2 very broad categories of loan repayment. One is going to be based on the amount of debt you have, and the other is based on income. These are probably going to change before you graduate, especially since we're in an election year. You're going to see Congress change and with that, they're going to probably address some changes here. The loan repayment based on debt are standard, graduated, extended, and extended, which means there's fixed payments, especially on the extended. The typical standard repayment is 10 years. That's kind of like the typical mortgage. The loan repayments based on income are based on income only. It doesn't matter whether you have $50,000 of student loan debt or $400,000 of student debt. Your monthly payments are based on how much you earn. And these are the kinds of categories of program that you can check into for that. This is the easiest example I can give you on how the two are different. If you had $100,000 of debt and you were in the standard 10-year repayment and your interest rate averaged out to be 6.3% on all the loans you borrowed, your monthly payment would be about $1,100 a month. It's a mortgage payment, right? And you would be paying off that debt in 10 years, making monthly payments of this. If you were on the income dependent option, let's say you're making $50,000 a year. It doesn't matter how much debt you have. If you're making $50,000 a year, your monthly payment is going to be $265 if it's just you and your household. If it's 2 people in your household, let's say you're married and you have a spouse, then your monthly payment goes up to $211 if your joint income is $50,000 a year, right? So this is what makes public sector jobs possible, in my opinion, if you have high debt. You can also qualify for public service loan forgiveness. I'm pretty sure that's going to change dramatically. And so while I allude to it in my slides, just pay attention to what happens in the changes in the legislation in the next 2 to 3 years as you approach graduation. How can you look at kind of these repayment options and play with numbers? You can go to your repayment estimator in your studentloans.gov website. Just log in. If you haven't created an account, you create an account, create a username, password, and then there is a repayment estimator. Just play with that, and that'll give you an idea of what loan repayment options exist right now and what those payments would be depending on the kind of debt you would see yourself coming out of law school as well as undergraduate with. You can get your total debt there and play with it. So keep informed, as I alluded to. That's what's going on in the legislation. There's 3 parts to this plan, remember. Apply each of those. Don't be passive in this process as you contemplate how you're going to pay for law school. Make sure that you are engaged in this element of it. It's a bit complicated, but you're going to law school. So you're going to be able to think well and do act seriously as you give this thought. Here's a bunch of websites that I think can be helpful in this process. As I mentioned, they'll be available on the deck that I send over to Emily and Corey, and that should be available on Whova shortly after this. So with that, what questions do we have? I know there's a gap and you all may need to be going, and that's fine. This is being recorded and I'm going to keep the recording going. So for those of you who have other things to attend to, I appreciate your time, but I'm happy to answer questions. If you like, make sure you either unmute if you want to catch my attention, or ask the question in the chat if you like. I'm not too sure if you can anonymously pose those questions. And Emily, I think I answered your question about the availability of the slides. Any other questions? And like I said, if you're going to ask questions, it's helpful if I can see your faces.
Hi, I'm Fabiola, and I'm from Puerto Rico. And
Hi, Fabiola.
I was seeing the prices in the United States. So I've never really considered going to law school in the States. Mm-hmm. Would it be the same here in Puerto Rico? Even though I'm thinking private schools, I searched and each credit is around $500 and public school is around $200. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I'll get scholarships. What do you recommend? Like, should I start looking for universities in the States or should I stick here in Puerto Rico?
Well, this is my general advice. The application process is about creating opportunity. So I would encourage you to apply to law schools in the States, but that isn't tied to the financial aid. It will obviously be a consideration for you, but for me personally, I think that's one of the mistakes that I made in the application process. I was very concerned 30 years ago about how could I afford law school. And I wasn't wrong in assuming that private schools were much more expensive, but what I was wrong in assuming was I wouldn't have resources available to me to help pay for that. And even if they weren't available for me, I was excluding myself from the opportunity for the school to help me if they wanted to. And so it can be difficult if you think about it and say, look, I'm going to apply to law schools, and if I get into some law schools, there may be a law school out there that I really, really want to attend, but I just can't afford it. If they're not giving me a scholarship package or a loan package that I'm comfortable with, I may have to turn them down, which can be heartbreaking. I'll acknowledge that. But I think it's better to be in the situation where you create as many opportunities for yourself in the law school application process, and then choose among those opportunities which is the best for you. And you'll only know which schools are going to be able to offer you scholarship packages by going through the application process. So when you go through the expo this afternoon, they're going to be able to tell you on average what scholarships students get, but they're not going to be able to tell you today what scholarship you would get if you got admitted. There's an evaluation process that could affect that. And so the only real way you can know what you're going to be offered is to subject yourself to the entirety of the process. And because of that, I would encourage that you apply to schools here on the mainland as well as the schools in Puerto Rico.
Thank
Any
you.
other questions? You're welcome. Good luck with that. Good question too. Any other questions, y'all?
Hold on. Can you see me first off, since you said the camera?
I can see your picture, Sophia, but I can hear you too, and that's fine. Just because I prefer it doesn't mean you have to do it. It's kind of like
No,
the way
it's
my
just
kids
I've been
treat
trying
me.
to. No, I've been trying to put on my camera on, but it hasn't been working recently. That's why I asked.
Okay, no, I can hear you. That's the most important, so that's fine.
I wanted to
there
ask.
you are. Hi.
Oh, okay. I didn't know if it worked.
Yeah,
I wanted
nice
to,
picture.
I wanted to ask about. I'm a freshman, so
Cool.
I'm still new to all this, and you said something about preparing for law school, and I like the budget that you put, like the step 1 and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of missed the part where you said about like whether or not we should do it by ourselves, or like what would you recommend about preparing for like the LSAT?
Oh, okay. So I use that as an example of resource allocation. And thanks for asking this question, because I only touched on the LSAT prep that's free through the Khan Academy. The Law School Academy the Law School Admission Council, the people who do the LSAT, they have a relationship with Khan Academy. Do you know what Khan Academy is?
Yeah.
I love them, man. That's the only way I can help my kids with homework. But so the Khan Academy actually has an LSAT prep course in their system. And I think it's well structured, especially for people who are online learners. And so you go in, you register, you take a diagnostic test. Based on the diagnostic test, the Khan Academy will come back and say, you should spend this much time on analytical reasoning, or it'll say, you've told us you're taking the test in 8 weeks. In the next 8 weeks, you should spend these many hours working on analytical reasoning, this many hours on logical reasoning, and this many hours on reading comprehension. And then if you sign up for it, it'll send you text messages or email messages on a weekly basis and will say, you put in 2 hours for logical reasoning this week. You should have put in 3, so try to make up this time. It's that organized. And so it does give a good structure. But I do acknowledge not everybody's an online learner. And so if the program is working for you, terrific, it's for free. If it's not, make sure you sign up for it and attempt it, so that if it's not working, you can give yourself enough time to look at other commercial, but maybe have to be paid for LSAT prep programs. By being here at PAD, I know that there's a lot of LSAT prep programs that are commercial, that by your membership in PAD, they can give you discounts, or sometimes they have raffles where you can get it for free. And so, give yourself enough time to see about that. And then some even have programs where if during your lunch hour, you sit in the cafeteria and sell it to your classmates, you can get a free version of the course. So, there's even ways that go around to help you pay for the LSAT prep course if it's a commercial one for cost, but it'll require some investigation.
All right.
Did that help you?
Yeah, it did.
Good. Any other questions out there? I am going to, just so you guys have it, I'm going to go and copy and paste my contact information, so that if you guys do have questions, I got to end my show to make it happen. If you do have questions that come up, you can get a hold of me anytime. Let me make sure I got this here. So there's my contact information. And while those of you are here, one of the things I can do real quick is also put the web address for the LSAT fee waiver page that the Law School Admission Council has. So let me bring that up, because I think that can be helpful. Also, for those of you who are in the application process, At today's Law Expo, I know a lot of schools, including ours, will be handing out application fee waiver code numbers, or if you give them their name, they'll send you a code. So just know that. I'll have some at the booth for me, and I'll just put those in the chat for people who come visit our booth and make those available. So this is the web link for the LSAT fee waiver program that the Law School Admission Council administers there. So hopefully that can be helpful too. Come on, get in there. There we go. So while I was doing that, did anybody come up with any other questions? No? Okay, well, I want to thank everybody for your time. I hope you found this helpful. Just 2 cents about my school. It's a great school located in Salt Lake City. Doesn't have the palm trees that Sophia has in her background, but it does look like that in my background. So if you like the mountains and pine trees as opposed to palm trees, take a look at us. Julia, thank you for your kind words. And also, once we get through this whole COVID stuff, I go around schools all the time doing this. So if you think your chapter of PAD would benefit from me doing this virtually or in person, don't hesitate to reach out to me, and I'm happy to kind of do this, and we can have a little bit more FaceTime to answer questions or look at your individual circumstances. So with that, I want to thank you guys for your time and attention. For those of you who are competing in the mock trial, good luck with that. And hopefully we'll see you during the Law Expo.